Here are the translated and rephrased stories presented in American English. This story, titled The Crossroads, began in 1975. My mother, shortly after giving birth to my older sister, contracted a severe case of pneumonia. The war had just ended, and medical supplies were desperately scarce. The doctors frankly told my family to take her home, suggesting they care for her there, as her condition in the hospital offered no hope. My family followed their advice and brought my mother home. After several days of being completely bedridden, she suddenly regained consciousness and recounted a profound experience she had during her near-death state. She explained that while she lay in a coma, she found herself standing at a pivotal crossroads. The path to her left was shrouded in an impenetrable, pitch-black darkness, while the path to her right was noticeably brighter, illuminated by an ethereal glow. Standing there were two elderly women, dressed in pristine white garments, their faces radiating an almost divine gentleness, and their voices were soothingly benevolent. "That direction is terrifying, my child. Do not go there. Come this way instead." My mother said that for reasons she couldn't explain, she refused to take the luminous, inviting path. Instead, she chose the opposite direction, the path shrouded in profound darkness. When the two women realized my mother was refusing to follow their guidance, they became visibly enraged. "No, I must stay to care for my children." Their fury intensified, escalating into an angry rebuke. "If you refuse to come with us and insist on staying for your children, then you will suffer immensely in the future, and you will have only yourself to blame." I can confirm that, indeed, just as they foretold, my mother endured countless hardships and ups and downs throughout her life, struggling immensely before finally achieving a measure of peace and stability in her later years. True to the pattern, after my mother made the choice to traverse that dark path, she immediately awoke. It's a phenomenon we often hear about. Individuals facing severe illness or on the brink of death frequently experience such dreamlike encounters. Their choices in these moments determine whether they return to the living world or pass on permanently. The vast majority who choose not to go with them, and instead opt to return, often wake up and recover from their ailments. This survival then allows them to share the extraordinary stories they witnessed. My mother's experience was precisely one of these. The second story, also recounted by my mother, is a childhood memory she shared with me, which I've titled The Child Who Followed Us Home. My hometown, she explained, was a small town nestled near Chowdock. One day, my father was riding his motorbike, carrying both my mother and me as we journeyed through the picturesque countryside. At that time, I was only about 3 or 4 years old. As my father drove, I suddenly pointed towards an ancient pagoda and, still quite young and with a lisp, exclaimed loudly, though somewhat indistinctly, "Before I was under that Buddha statue. When I saw Mom and Dad visiting the temple, I ran after you to come home." My parents were instantly startled by my words because they had never taken me to that specific temple before. And a child of that age typically doesn't fabricate such elaborate stories. My statement, therefore, was quite unsettling and eerie. My third story is one I personally witnessed, unlike the first two, which were relayed to me by my mother. I was exactly 16 years old at the time, having lived in the United States for 5 years since my family's immigration. We had just moved into a newly purchased small house. That particular night, as was often the case on Friday evenings since the next day was Saturday, I stayed up late chatting with friends on the phone. After hanging up and closing my bedroom door, I climbed into bed next to my mother, though sleep didn't come to me immediately. While I was still tossing and turning, my mother was already fast asleep. Suddenly, the soft glow of the night light from the hallway crept into the room, as if the door was being ever so gently opened, then carefully closed again. It was as though someone was trying to sneak in, wary of waking the occupants. The movements were incredibly subtle and quiet. Although the light was dim, I could still discern the silhouette of my older sister's thin, knee-length nightgown, and I recognized it as hers. She then gently lifted the blanket, climbed into bed, snuggled up to our mother, and settled down to sleep beside her. At the time, I simply assumed my sister and her husband had had an argument, and she was upset, so she came to sleep with Mom. With that logical explanation in mind, I didn't question it further and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, after waking up and going downstairs, I found both my mother and sister in the kitchen. Without thinking, I blurted out, "What did you two argue about that you had to come sleep here last night?" My sister looked utterly bewildered, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. She responded, "What are you saying? I slept in my own room all night. I never came over here." That's when a chill ran down my spine. I immediately recounted, in vivid detail, everything I had witnessed the previous night. As I finished my story, a chilling realization struck me. I remembered that when that person had climbed onto the bed, the mattress hadn't shifted, and I hadn't felt any impression of weight. It was then that I slowly pieced it together, the unsettling truth dawning on me. It wasn't my sister in the room last night. A few days later, my grandmother came to visit. As she sat in the living room, she suddenly turned to my mother and asked, "Whose daughter is that in the red shirt sitting in the kitchen?" My mother looked into the kitchen, but saw no one. After that incident, a silent understanding began to settle over the entire family. It became clear that there was a presence in this house. Someone, or something, else was here. Every single member of my family felt an unsettling sensation when left alone in the house. Even my brother-in-law, a staunch skeptic of all things supernatural, once fled the house because he had an overwhelming feeling that someone was standing directly behind him. Eventually, after a myriad of such inexplicable occurrences, my family grew curious and began to investigate. They soon discovered that a young girl had tragically died in that very house before our family moved in. My fourth story, a truly chilling account, was recounted to me by my Aunt Ute. She spoke of a man with a head drenched in blood. I remember one day, my grandmother invited a monk to our house to perform a blessing for my aunt, who had suffered a severe illness that had deeply alarmed the entire family. It was only when my aunt later recounted her experience that we truly understood what had happened. She explained that evening, as dusk settled and a persistent drizzle fell, my aunt and her friend, Kayet, were driving from San Antonio to Austin. Mid-journey, as they stopped at a red light, my aunt noticed a group of people, all dressed in black raincoats, standing eerily in the middle of the road, staring intently at her from a distance. Seeing this, my aunt turned to Kayet, who was sitting next to her, and asked, "Why aren't they afraid of cars? Standing right in the middle of the road like that. If the light changes, how will they possibly get out of the way in time?" Kayet, my aunt's friend, turned back and said, "What are you talking about? I don't see anyone." According to Kayet's later recollection, it was at this very moment that my aunt's face utterly transformed, turning deathly pale and drained of all color. Concerned, Kayet pressed her. "What's wrong? Why aren't you answering me?" But my aunt remained frozen, her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to look left or right, as if desperately trying to avoid something lurking just outside the window. She simply continued to drive in terrified silence. Seeing her friend's extreme pallor and obvious terror, Kayet kept pestering her, asking repeatedly and insistently until, finally, my aunt managed to speak. "There's a white guy, his hair matted with dried blood, wearing a light pink polo shirt, hanging onto the car door. He's just hanging there, staring at me." Upon returning home, my aunt recounted this terrifying story to my grandmother, and immediately afterwards, she fell ill for an entire week. This explains why, instead of seeking medical attention at a doctor's office or hospital, my grandmother chose to invite a Buddhist monk to our home. After the monk performed the blessing, my aunt's health miraculously recovered. The monk, my aunt recalled, also made this pronouncement: "It's fortunate that Kayet, your friend who was in the car with you, had not yet reached her destined time. That is why you were spared. Had you been traveling alone, or with someone else whose time was also up, you would not have escaped." The monk's implication was clear. It was Kayet's destiny, not being fulfilled yet, that prevented a tragic accident. If my aunt had been alone, or with someone whose time was up, her own life would very likely have ended that night. My fifth story, which I've titled The Death Row Inmate, is one I experienced firsthand. In 2012, I embarked on my first business trip to El Paso. El Paso proved to be significantly colder than my home in Austin, and having forgotten to pack a warm coat, I developed a mild cold. After finishing work and having dinner, I promptly went to bed. As I was deeply asleep, I suddenly found my entire body paralyzed. My legs felt as if they were tightly bound. I vaguely opened my eyes, struggling to regain my bearings in the oppressive darkness. Then, illuminated by the faint light filtering in from the hallway through the window, I perceived a colossal black shadow, towering all the way to the ceiling. Its mouth stretched into an impossibly long grin, reaching its ears and revealing rows of stark white teeth. It used its hands to forcefully grasp and cross my arms into an X shape above my headboard. Its eyes glowed with an unnerving intensity, and its face contorted into an expression of sheer delight as I screamed for help. The more I struggled, the closer its lips moved towards my face. It was both looking at and sniffing my skin, much like a ravenous beast preparing to devour its prey. A profoundly strange and terrifying feeling then overwhelmed me. It was as if a voice in my head communicated a chilling truth. This entity was a death row inmate, and in life, it had likely been a perpetrator of numerous assaults against women. This horrific thought spurred me to struggle even more violently. Despite finding it difficult to breathe, I gathered every ounce of my remaining strength and quickly began to chant the name of Buddha. Miraculously, as I uttered the second chant, the entity vanished. Drenched in a cold sweat of fear, I wiped my brow and immediately stood up, searching for the Buddha amulet I usually carried with me. It was then that I realized, to my dismay, I had left my protective amulet at home. Then there's another story, one that unfolded like this. It was during another business trip to a secluded, sparsely populated area, where everything initially seemed to be going smoothly. However, that evening, after completing my work, I quickly returned to my hotel and settled down for sleep. As I was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly immersed in a very peculiar dream. In the dream, a young woman confided in me, her words echoing distinctly. "Please find me. I'm near a river, close by." Immediately after she spoke, a vivid scene materialized before me. A girl, dressed in a maroon shirt, was bound to a chair. Standing beside her were two men, whose faces remained obscured. Startled by the dream, I initially dismissed it as a mere product of watching too many movies and didn't give it much thought. But on my way to work the next day, I saw the exact same girl from my dream on a billboard. The billboard clearly read, "Please help find her." This meant the girl was in distress, perhaps lost or worse, prompting her family to put up public advertisements in their desperate search. I was utterly stunned, speechless. That night, I prayed, asking for more details if the girl truly needed my help. However, as I reflect now, perhaps our destinies were not meant to intertwine further, for I never encountered the girl again. My seventh and final story occurred approximately 10 years ago, but remains etched vividly in my memory. My best friend, when she was alive, was a woman plagued by considerable karmic misfortune. Every man who entered her life proved to be abusive and exploitative. Countless times, her tears would make me seethe with anger, feeling sick to my stomach. Yet, no matter how much she cried or how tirelessly I offered advice, it seemed as if her fate was predetermined. It was as though she was born into this life solely to settle a debt with these men. And life, in its cruel irony, finally offered her a good man. But not long after, she tragically passed away in an accident at the young age of 32. At the funeral, my mother was quite surprised to see her laid to rest in a red dress. I reassured my mother, explaining that in America, funeral customs differ from those in Asia. Here, colors are often chosen based on the deceased's preferences during their lifetime. Some nights after the funeral, in a state between waking and dreaming, I saw her standing at the foot of my bed. She declared, "Those wretched men made my life a living hell. They will pay for what they did. I will make them return everything they took from me." I was terrified. The gentle best friend I had known was utterly transformed. Her eyes, once so kind, now blazed with fury. Her face was a ghostly, greenish pale, and her lips were a deep purple. She paced back and forth in the very red dress she had been buried in. Regaining my composure, I tried to conceal my terror and spoke to her, precisely as I remember it. "Hey, do you remember when you and I used to study Buddhism? What happens to us is because of our past actions. Let go of what brings pain so you can have a better next life. Just consider them your karma. You've already paid them back. You're done. Don't get involved with them anymore. If that's what they owe you, let them pay in their next life. If you create more karma now, you'll only suffer again in your next life. Let go. Find peace, and remember everything we learned from Buddhism." As soon as I finished speaking, she vanished. Several months later, again in that liminal state between sleep and wakefulness, I suddenly caught the distinct scent of the soap she used to wear when she was alive. In my hazy dream, "Don't worry about me anymore. I've found a peaceful place and now understand everything clearly. Live well and don't worry. I'll visit you when the time is right." With a final wave, she disappeared into a wisp of white smoke. Since then, I have only seen her in my dreams, and each time we meet, she is joyful, and we play together just like we did when she was alive. Today, as I sat writing this very story in my backyard, I again caught a faint whiff of that familiar soap, bringing tears to my eyes as memories of her flooded back. She was my very first best friend when I initially arrived in the United States, having only been here for 3 years at the time. We were like chickens and ducks, struggling to communicate much in English. Yet, she never once mocked me. Instead, she patiently and kindly taught me the language. I will cherish the memory of this friend forever.